don't need to show off my hairy chest quite that much.
Oh, don't want to.
How are you, boss?
You don't want to overstimulate the ladies watching, right?
No, I doubt that's the case. Anyway,
Life is good. Ready to go again. I had some interesting thoughts, and it's going to segue nicely into the discussion on neurology that you're planning today.
great. Well, let's. I want to emphasize it really helps if we warm up with your question.
Got my properly handled cup.
Handled cup by an anti-Christian company.
I don't know. That's Ishtar, I think, right there.
Yeah, I know, but
I'm just saying.
they're Schultz is part of the woke movement. And Starbucks is a woke company from way back.
Yep. The woke thing is funny. There was a good article today that I read that I found amusing, which is, and I don't remember the name of the institution. I think it's in England. It might be in Scotland. It's they're censoring the use of the book of 1984.
You're kidding me.
I can't make up this stuff, man. I am not that good. It's just funny because it's like, really? I mean, let's say it just unabashedly silly. And they're like, oh, it has shocking parts in it that they don't want to hurt the kids' feelings or some nonsense. Just crazy.
That's crap. They just don't want to they don't want to show the kids what they're being victimized by.
And that's funny. So that segues nicely into what I'm working on, which is it starts with complementary activity, which is the work of this science. Wonderful work. It makes things clear that were not clear before, because you now have a metric by which to gauge it, the factuality of the situation, which is what is entirely lacking when you're being subjected to psychological warfare.
It's true. Well, don't you find it comforting? In other words, I find it much, despite the fact that knowing how bad it is, how bad what's going on, because it makes you angry, but the ability to comprehend it and put it, systematize it, so that you understand it.
It's an interesting terminology you used. You said, does it make you angry? It doesn't make me angry. It's like this is the interesting function of it is there's activation energy required to become aware of the situation we find ourselves in. And this activation energy is inertia, mental inertia, neurological inertia. And it requires a certain madness to even go into the weeds to figure out what's really going on. Yes. And that's what it takes. It's madness. And you have to be driven mad. And it's like, when I say madness, it's anger.
Yes.
It looks to the regulars, the people they call the normies. It looks like madness, like insanity. Like, why would you, like you said it well, you said, I said, why did you start on this project? You said you'd have to be mad to do it, to start it out.
You would.
And it is. Well, that's what starts you out. You're in the hot seat. I ran into a patient today. This was an interesting lady. She cracked her tooth off, one of the molars, maybe 6 months ago. And so she's coming to me because she was scrupulously avoiding chewing on that side, and she forgot. And it made her swell up real big right here. And it's like painful and swelling. And she was trying to avoid the dentist. And it's like, no, now she's going to go to the dentist. There's no question, right? And I said, well, you're doing all right. It just takes this much agitation or irritation for you to get enough activation energy to go do it. And that's all it is. It's irritating. The fact is that you were irritated enough to figure it out.
Yes.
And it's like, it's unavoidable. That's the same thing happened to me, because I pulled the stoppers out, which is, there's inhibitory functions here, which is like, this is impolite to even think about. Correct. And that's actually the stopper. And it's like, yes. So you pull the stoppers out and you're like, I don't care if it's uncomfortable anymore, because I'm irritated by the position I'm in.
I definitely got the original intuition from studying war. the history of war, specifically the few writers on military history. One of them is Machiavelli, of course, but Clausewitz and Sun Tzu and 15 others, right? But there aren't 100 of them.
Right.
It's surprising that I'm trying to think of the one. Little Heart is
Yep.
Little Heart is somebody. So you read them, and what I got from them was that everybody misunderstands Machiavelli, right? He's trying to tell you that those moral presumptions, right? Those things that you don't want to think about, or you've habituated yourself to think about, those become obstacles to empirically understanding something that is actually, in other words, it's prohibiting you from thinking outside the box you have made for yourself. Because what you want in a polity is to make a box. You want to make a box for thought, because you don't want people stepping outside the box. And the box becomes successful at preventing people outside the box by preventing them from thinking outside that box. The problem is your enemy is not thinking inside that same box. So when he says, his basic argument is look at it purely empirically and mercilessly first. Because morality is a luxury good, right? Necessary for your survival. The same thing appears in warfare. Napoleon didn't plan so much as research.
Okay.
He used exhaustive research, and he was a total autistic fucking nerd, right? In the same, he could speak and all, but he's a very smart man. So he would just and model where you would be, what you would do, and then he would magically appear there. Right, because he's not following tradition. He's just looking at evidence. Well, you see the same thing in all walks of life. One of the problems with business is that in any given industry, you become accustomed to the way things are done, and so you don't disrupt the way things are done. The same thing in the academy. You become accustomed to the way things are done. The problem is those boxes which you think as efficient, in other words, reduce your difficulty in taking action for your benefit, that actually becomes an inhibition, because you can't think of new innovations, right? And you can't understand innovations being applied to you. So
Right.
just like we can't understand, somebody said, Kurt, you're way ahead of the curve on this, but we can't understand that it's just a female strategy been let loose into economy and polity, right? Because the concept of that's alien, right? Matter of fact,
It's hard to understand what that means. It's
right. I mean, it's
like,
and so the fact that you could conduct in Europeans, the fact that you conduct war against institutions of cultural production, right, is not the same as European sense of you conduct war against stuff and people, right? That's what war means. But you can't say that the post-war movement came here to conduct war from within, right? War by sedition, but they did. But our people don't understand that. And so, whenever so for me, I got that instinct really young, which was you just think about the way I said it. I think about everything, even if it's the most awful thing I would never do, I think it through, right? Because it's not so much I would do that, it's that the other side might do that. So you have to think. So what I always say is, discover the field of potential opportunities. In other words, of the field of potential futures, right? Given the field of potential actions, bet on the set of actions or take the actions that produce the highest probability of the largest number of outcomes. Right? And it's only at that point you can say, well, I can do this moral or immoral thing. It's not, you have to know why you're gating yourself and negating yourself is actually making you lose.
Right.
So I got that very early. And again, it's why I think females have suppressed adversarial competition among boys, and just like the academy is now selecting for race, etc., instead, and diversity instead of excellence. And so these things are showing up all over the economy and across the polity as accumulated incompetencies. I mean, think about it this way: women aren't even being raised to be mothers anymore.
That is
so we're actually becoming incompetent at parenting.
Yes. Yes. It's
a child is a pet, a luxury good, instead of we have to produce the additional generation in order to pay for our old age. Right? It's not a civic duty anymore, or it's not a personal necessity or a civic duty.
Outsource that to the favela, please.
Oh my God! Did you really have to say that? That was horrible.
Got you, big boy.
So mean. I was thinking before today, I was like, I got to get a few zingers in at Brad because I think he's getting ahead of me.
I got you that time.
It's like you and Martin are the same. You, Martin, Luke, Brandon, you're all the same. I mean, no matter what I say, you're unflappable. Right?
I don't care anymore. That's like that. We've been baked long enough. It's like,
and I'm like a sucker for you guys. I take every freaking, I bite at every shiny object you idiots throw out in front of me.
Thank you. So Peterson talks about this because we're talking about the people that are demoralized, right? And Peterson talked about lobster neurosystems, right? So the lobster gets depressed and his whole nervous system kind of dissolves and then regrows in a different way, right? And it's kind of
this is fascinating.
Yeah, it is. But this is what it is. It's like it's neuroplasticity, and it comes down to this: you got all these people that have been baked in the box, and their minds conform to the box, like a loaf of bread conforms to the pan. There you go. Yep. And the issue is this flappability issue is you cannot. They already are primed to think you're mad, right?
What do you mean they're already? I mean, I would just like you to rephrase that. They're already their natural presumption, because they're in that box, would be to perceive anyone who steps outside that box as mad.
Right, and you must be mad, and therefore it's essential for you to be unflappable and not mad.
Yes, that's
in true. Appearance, right?
I guess that's how we all.
Because he's like
interesting. We all couldn't care less about rejection. That's a really common personality trait. Rejection doesn't matter. It's usually said as confidence. I'm not sure so much it's confidence as just not caring about, because we tend to have we all have low agreeableness, right? So we're friendly and we like to get along, but we don't need to agree to other people.
Right. But it's the issue is this: is you're trying to achieve influence in a circle of people that have been baked into the wrong shape.
Correct.
And so it's like possible. It's not true. You have a bad.
No. Sorry, I didn't mean to I didn't mean to incite your "don't let Kurt go negative" response.
It's not personal, Kurt. It's not.
Oh no, I know, but we're in this forum.
That's right.
So I didn't mean to say that. It's more that it's just a lot of work.
It's just work.
Yes, it's a lot of work, but we did cover yesterday the difficulty in moving downstream. I mean, it's very difficult to take this kind of thing, kind of set of concepts into a populace, which is why it seems to take so much time.
I know the issue in my mind goes like this: is that it's to make it into a cognitive function is an error, in my opinion. They have to feel that you're doing the right thing, and they will agree to do the right thing with you because you're cooperating with them in helping them achieve the goals that they seek to achieve in their lifetimes. They recognize gain.
Yeah, the
by
problem is,
cooperation.
problem, again, that's true. But again, I'm really aware of the identity problem, and I think you're playing it less.
Wait, I want to know what this is good. Their problem, the identity problem. Please clarify what you mean.
As your individual ability decreases, your necessity to identify with someone or some group increases. So that's why it's easy to be a globalist if you're up in the lofty airs of professional careers, right? Because, I've had people work with me from 30 some odd countries, right? I mean, it's probably higher than that, and I just don't know, right? And we're all the same because you've been educated in the science or technology or engineering. You've succeeded to a relatively privileged position in life. You have a great deal of you have income, and it's sufficient, and great deal of sovereignty. And the people who were all basically Aristotelian, right? Not, our religion becomes way down there at the bottom. It's like my friends from Iran. I mean, he has a prayer rug on for a mouse pad, right? It doesn't mean that's the extent of it, is reciting his prayers that day, but you never notice it in business, except he's a little hyper moral, to be honest with you. So it's not like in Russia where I've been there, and you walk in a bathroom with some Muslim guys washing his feet in the sink, which I find just revolting as fuck. But anyway.
Wait, this moral issue, I have to ask a question, which is a sidebar. Is he's a bit hyper moral, is what you said, right? Does that mean he doesn't like the hooker and blow jokes?
No. It's more that I don't know how to put a word around it. Islam is an underclass religion of acceptance, right? It's why it doesn't include any of the commands that our culture does, which is to get other people to behave in a high trust, high cost way. It says for example, you deserve respect rather than you earn it, which is the primary origin of the problem that they have integrating, is that you have to earn respect through demonstration of value to the commons. In their world, you must give someone respect, right? Whether they do demonstrate it or not. It's a perfect underclass religion, whereas we have a perfect upper class religion. Everybody's responsible for domesticating everyone else into responsibility for the commons. They're not. They're only responsible for encouraging people to be good Muslims, and therefore it's like do no wrong. It's not don't do any right, right? And so I'm trying to, it's like when you try to reduce things to like the major comparisons, you've got to oversimplify, but it doesn't mean the underlying first principle isn't different. Fundamentally, Christianity is about taking responsibility for the middle part of the commons, right? And Islam is saying you're not responsible for anything except your adherence to the word of God. And so it's a very different scope, which is why, of course, it works for them, because as you brought up yesterday, they're tribal. And so they use storytelling and tribalism. And so they never managed to overcome, like Europeans did, tribalism. Right. And the difference also begins, it's much easier in European for tribalism because they're all the freaking same anyway. Whereas over there, every tribe that comes by is trying to kick ass, take names, and take over and steal your shit. And so they never were able to overcome tribalism. They weren't even able to overcome familism. So in their world, they have their triangulation isn't religion, state, and people. It's family and religion in the absence of state and people. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
And a similar problem in China. I mean,
Interesting premise, because it's like has a adolescent feel to it. Like there's the intertribal conflict, and they just recognize Western civilization as another tribe to dominate.
yes.
That's all.
Listen, it is not a religion, right? It's the political system
That's it. It's a political system that I'm talking
Right.
about. Yeah,
of conquest.
but it's juvenile.
It's juvenile.
That's all.
Well, the average IQ of a Muslim's, the average IQ of a Muslim is below the employability in Western civilization.
Wait, so I
So
want
what
to I want to recap this a little segment.
Did I sneak one in there
That
that
was
got you?
close. That was pretty close, buddy.
That was pretty good. I sneak one in there.
You just dodged it a little bit. It's like,
Well, they're giving up on Islamism. I mean, this year, there's no. It's good. I want to say something positive. Is that the younger generation is giving up on Islamism? If they give up Islamism, they're going to end up with, being more like Catholics, which is what Islam was a branch of. Then they have been a pain in the ass. So
I go to this. We were discussing the identity problem.
yep.
And it occurs that identity and agency are inversely proportional.
Either that or it's a scope. Yeah, proportional. Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm done with that segment.
No, it's true. I mean, you imitate if you can't reason.
Okay.
Right? You innovate if you can. Right?
Yes.
You compete if you can with innovation. So what's when we call it IQ, what are we really talking about? Adaptive velocity. That's all. We're talking about doing something faster. When somebody's, gee, you're smart. No, I just got there faster than you did. Right? And the problem is at some point the person can't get there because every stepping stone to get there is just too much work.
Which is interesting. So we in the vernacular, in our parlance, we say sharper or more dull.
Yes. Yeah,
and it's like cuts through the junk or doesn't cut through the junk, right? And so we're back to this neural adaptation, which is back to Peterson and neuroplasticity, and becoming to function, to understand what's going on in the wider world outside the box that you were raised in, right? The protected environment, and adapting to that and recognizing psychological war when it's occurring right in front of you for the last 100 years, right? Which is like, that's outside the box thinking, because it's like that one,
Well, just remember, if you look at the world, Peterson is talking to people who feel they lack agency. And his recipe is to give them responsibility, right? Our market, my market, isn't the people who are weak, right? It's the people who have the will, right? The confidence, but they don't know how to organize the means because they can't produce a solution. So if we produce a solution, they should be able to organize the means. So there's a difference between those people who need therapy and those people who need organization or leadership.
Yes.
Right? And so, it's right that our people aren't, a conservative by his nature isn't afraid of responsibility. The people who avoid responsibility just don't know that they need it and will be happier with it. And then the left avoids responsibility. So that's
those ones. The issue, the chief point of contention that I have been working with here, which is this brush, which is the enemy is mobilizing based upon identity.
Yes.
Large groups of people to subjugate the Western civilization, let's say. And it is the neutrality of a large swaths of the population in ignorance due to the psychological nature of the operation is the problem.
Correct.
So it's not necessarily, I am not interested in mobilizing those people in an organization, but demobilizing them from neutrality.
Correct.
That's all I'm trying to do.
Right. They need understanding. The way that the leadership, the people who want to act, that already understand the problem, they want leadership.
And
The
yes,
people in the middle want understanding, and the people on the left need to be disempowered.
that's right. So the people that are to be organized and enact the solution to this problem require what you said, license, I think, or they need license. And it's like the license comes from that swath in the middle that is neutral or and thinking inside the box.
Mhm.
That's so that to cause them to understand and sympathize is all that is necessary to gain the license.
I always think of it as they are morally tolerant, excessively morally tolerant. And that's because it's part of Christianity. And it's also part of because it's part of Christianity, it's part of the Enlightenment and American mythos and the post-war mythos. So they're excessively tolerant, and their tolerance has been abused, and they need to realize that their tolerance has been abused. Not that they're bad people, right? Not for being intolerant, but their tolerance was taken advantage of.
That's how I gauge it.
So I always say people need a moral license to be angry, right?
I know, but the anger is just to motivate you.
Well, no, I that's what I mean. You have to have it's like you said earlier. It's how do you create the amplitude necessary to change the state, change behavior. Well, I mean, moral insult, being taken advantage of, is enough. If you've been taken advantage of and made a fool of, that's even worse. If you've been taken advantage and made a fool of and you're under threat, that's even worse. Now they're just like,
there's a series there.
They're getting there, right?
Well, their nose is being dragged through the Leninist hell.
Right. And, it's like we forget that Hillary Clinton was a Leninist. She was in Yale. She was a Leninist. She was part of that group. I'm not saying in the abstract. I mean, she joined the groups and led the parts that were Leninist, which was authoritarianism, right? Barack Obama was part of the, what do you call it? The We Hate White People the movement in Black churches. I can't read it's got a name and I'm forgetting it at the moment. Anti-colonialist, whatever, but he was and raised by under the Marxist tradition. So we have Bill Clinton, who's really just a working class Democrat with a high IQ that was just really just trying to show dominance expression, right? But and what happened, of course, was he's a pragmatist, and the minute he saw the pragmatic value of centrism, he went there. But Hillary didn't. She stayed a Leninist, right? Barack Obama did what the most effective means of destroying a country, which is to do nothing. But he did nothing, right? And so you get a series of this, and we know we've got this guy in here he's not only knowingly do nothing, he's just like I
don't think he's qualified to do anything. He doesn't do anything, right? A sock puppet is a proper descriptive terminology. I have used that myself, and I'm drinking.
He's clearly lacking the mental faculties. And we always knew this before because he's always been a sock puppet, a windsock. Yeah. He just takes whatever position he can stand up in front of and say. So he's always been a windsock, and now he's a sock puppet, right?
He's a shell of his former self.
Right, and you look at who's in his administration, who's putting all these pieces, and they might as well be the ADL because that's where they really are. So, I mean, of course, we're seeing Bolshevism take over, Leninism, Bolshevism take over because we've let it happen. It doesn't mean we have to continue to let it happen, but the problem is you get the deep state now, and we used to be the financial sector figured it would kill the government if it had to. Right now, the government is in a position where, they realize they're in trouble, and they're trying to produce Leninism, even if they don't think that's what they're doing. They may think they're just trying to serve the public interest as they understand it, or they may just be acting out of self-interest. But the guy, what does they call it? Bio-Leninism, which is identitarian, right? Well, it's just Leninism, which is a class system, to bio-Leninism, which is an identity system. And why? Because identities are the easiest thing to organize the nitwits by, because identity is their system of measurement. So
that's right. It requires no cognitive output.
No, it just requires that it feels right.
But so this goes to this ideal thing we were talking about yesterday. It's the ideal that they're trying to enact that is sufficient to allow them to maintain themselves at the top of the social hierarchy. How about that?
What does every priesthood do that can? What does every theocracy do? They produce stagnation and extraction. And they don't produce any goods except the false belief, right, that some salvation will happen.
That's right. So it's kleptoparasitism at its finest.
It's the ultimate expression of the female, kleptoparasitism. Seduction with false promise in order to obtain extractions by the manufacture of social construction using fictionalisms.
There you go.
That's the female method of governance. Well, how do women manage children? By seduction, using false promise of future gains, or maintaining care, maintaining inclusion, by use of a narrative, a social construction within the family, of using some sort of fictionalisms, right? Some storytelling. And this is how they program children to behave long enough, right? And to stay under their control long enough to be able to maintain their loyalty into adulthood, right? To which point, if they're successful, they've produced children who will protect them in an older age. So it's absolutely fucking obvious what women are doing, right? Well,
it's Ishtar.
Ishtar.
You ever study Ishtar?
No, I don't. I don't study primitive people.
I'm going to tell you about Ishtar. It's quite interesting. It's quite interesting because Ishtar is a goddess, okay, and she's pictured on top of lions with bird feet that are clawed, grabbing some lions, but she has in her hands a rod and a ring, okay, like an ankh, a rod and a ring, and it's like the rod is because she's going to throttle you if she needs to, and the ring is fertility, the offer of fertility.
Yes.
And it's Ishtar, and Ishtar goes to East Star, which is Venus, right? The East Star, Venus, and the red star of the Soviet Union. There you have it. I've tied it together as much as I can for this Leninist crowd. So
for the superstitious and mythological crowd, you've tied it together nicely.
Yes, I'm trying to draw
you're showing what you're showing it do is it's an eternal. That's what Peterson said.
They're not going to change. This is a method of warfare being waged for dominance that has been occurring for thousands of years.
Right. And and we know because mothers do this because it's the cheapest way of managing children through the control of information, right? That's why mothers do it. It's cheap. How do they manage men? How do they manage other women? Gossiping, shaming, rallying, undermining, psychologizing, moralizing, reputation destruction, canceling, and sedition. Well, that's what a mother does. She protects her brood by social construction internally. So the problem is women are evolved to lie. Now, in their minds, it's beneficial lying. They're doing good. So they don't think of it as lying. They think of it as convincing, but it's lying. Right?
Convincing by other means.
Yeah, and they can't stop it. I mean, you see, if you've had a daughter, right? You didn't have any daughters, did you? You did? One daughter. So you watch daughters, right? Learn how to manipulate, right? And the best ones are the really precocious ones that may have a really flamboyant mother that's over the top, right? And you can see them at like 5. They're working it. And your dad, like for me, I'm a dad, all right? And I'm like, God damn, women are amazing, right? I mean, how did you, it's instinct, right? Meanwhile, the boy is like, your son is like, it's a stick. I can hit things with it. It's a puddle. I can splash in it. Right? It's a rock. I can break things with it. Right? It's got its own agency. I can chase it. Right? I mean, boys, women. I mean, that whole manipulation thing. It's clear evidence that the production of the female brain is by the presence of more chromosomes that are producing more volume. And that's why boys develop slower, is because we've got to catch up.
Sorry. Yes.
Just like, and so it's like I've come to the conclusion that, contrary to all of human history, women are intrinsically evil. It's just hard to express it, right? Men tend to be intrinsically good and just don't have. They just have a lot of opportunities to express the
distracted. Squirrel, check it out.
Well, it's because we keep each other in check.
That's right.
I mean, it's different when you're all in the same grade, but if you look at societies where boys are admixed, I mean, Africa is a great example. I love, there's stuff in it. I mean, the older boys, if you get out of line, an older man will tell the older boys who will beat the fuck out of you. Right? Right? That's how things work.
That's right. The officer tells the sergeant to discipline the boys.
It's like,
wow.
We used to have that in military schools, right? It would be the older boys responsible. We also had that in the one-room schools. The older kids are responsible for the younger kids. And we had that in families. The older kids are responsible for the younger kids. Well, you learn, right? I mean, right? But we've taken away all those guidelines. And so you wonder why people get out of hand.
There you have it.
There's no outsourcing human development. Anyway, we were having a fun talk there about identity being
the inverse of agency.
Because this is the same reason. Why does identity matter? Well, identity matter the same means that archetypes and heroes and gods matter. Is there systems of measurement that you can empathize with and sympathize with without having to reason with, right? Like you just gave an analytic expression of Ishtar, right? But in history, you would get that 35,000 times story, right? During your life, and you would go to rituals for it and whatever thing. And even if you don't understand it at first, you're indoctrinated into it, right? Anyway, and the difference is we have this idea that gods are gods of something. That's not always true. They're more like personalities. And in Egypt, they just got really sophisticated with it. But we have this idea, God of something. That's not really true.
Right.
they're more like personalities or they're like personality archetypes, right?
They can express themselves through people, right?
Right. So like I said, they're means of calculation. Well, what's after that? What's after it's like that's what we call hero ethics, like imitating heroes, right? You
Right.
can do that without any reason at all, just by empathy, right? You can learn rule ethics, right, which requires verbal, or you can learn outcome ethics, which is scientific, right? But you can ascend that gradient into precision, or you can decline that gradient into generalization. And so it's a beautiful thing to have this spectrum, just like it's a beautiful thing to have, occult, religion, ideology, philosophy, logic, and science, right? These things are graceful means of increasing our systems of measurement, because frankly, all humans are subject to an environment in which they've got to make lots of decisions, and we're vastly different in our ability to make them.
That's right.
So identity is very important at the bottom. And we can't get rid of kinship, which we touched on yesterday. I don't know if it was you, the other guys yesterday, but we touched on kin selection, as everybody demonstrates it, right? I mean, the fact that you and I are close is because we're like 3 steps away, genetic steps away from each other. And I wish I could have got the tall part, the tall, skinny part.
It's like the Kevin Bacon thing, right?
Yeah,
degrees of separation, right?
Yeah. Oh, and it's like your friends will generally be right within this degree of separation, and that only changes as you get up into oddities, like outliers who are really true internationalists, because they have more in common with other true internationalists, hyper capable people, than they do with their own. Whereas at the bottom, it's the opposite direction. The only thing they can understand they have common with is people who basically fully agree with them. And so you get fragmentation at the bottom, right? And so the difference on the left is their fragmentation isn't as severe as right's fragmentation, because the left is more willing to submit to the direction of the herd than the right is. And that's because, we're more skeptical, we demand higher loyalty, greater purity, and greater disgust. So you get these behaviors that are really quite obvious as to how the different parts work, but in the end, it's just male and female. And that's because that's all nature's got to work with. Like, you gave me 2 fucking choices. What do you expect me to do? I'm Mother Nature. It's not like I got a lot of fucking options here.
Right? like this, it's like, despite the identity people crafting new identities ad lib.
Well, I mean, it's like I gave this talk to marketers a long time ago, right? Not a long, 10 years ago, right? And I said, you got to think about identities as playing cards, right? Or like I used the case of Magic the Gathering cards were popular among nerds back then. I don't know if they still are.
Right.
But so this is this role, that's that role, that's that role, that's that role. And so everybody sort of goes to the portfolio of available identities and they pick a few.
Right.
Right. And if you go to their closet, you can pretty much tell which ones they've picked from. If you can't, you can find it in their language, what words they use. Right. And so I said the problem of marketing, the ease of marketing from 1850 to 1960 is that everybody had the card, I want to be middle class. I want to escape the lack of choices and poverty of my ancestors. I want to be what we consult. Middle class just means middle class consumption. Right? I can have my own property in my own house. I can be self-determinant in some means. And so everybody had that card. The problem is that card has lost all its value because everybody's middle class. In other words, everybody's consuming a great deal. And so the value of that card. So instead of selling to that one card, which is what everybody did from 1800 to, right? You're selling this one card, right? Now you've got to create an ad for this card, an ad for that card, an ad for that card, an ad for that card. The people who did that back in the day, I thought it was the best example was PlayStation. So PlayStation, and I said, had this talk with Microsoft marketing manager. Said the problem is you have 3 cards. You don't have knowledge worker. You have home user, knowledge worker, game user, and developer, right? Really IT guy, right? IT. So you have these different, you don't have a lot of cards. The problem is people, every time you talk to one of those groups, the card is too low resolution and you're offending them. And so you have to produce more messages to more markets. And of course, all those people had grown up in the middle-class marketing,
Okay.
single message or very clear markets. And I'm trying to say, you guys missed the internet window and you're missing the marketing identity window. And this is back when another guy who ran a small agency in Seattle, which I love. I used to meet with this guy just so he could tell war stories, right? And he's like, no, it's like the problem where Seattle is behind in development behind San Francisco is Microsoft marketing creates false positives. So the area is flooded with ex-Microsoft people whose messaging doesn't fly because Microsoft's a false positive. Now, right? In other words, generates false. Then the company's successful despite their marketing. Matter of fact, we had great. I was given, can't say by who, but they have these big books that come out. Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. They come out. And this is like the whole company strategy, right? It's this big fucking book. Right? And, you go through this and you look at the real marketing data, the raw marketing data.
Right.
Right. And it's like, if they open their mouths, people hate the company more. The best thing they can do is be quiet. Except every marketer's been chartered with saying something.
I have to say something, otherwise I'm not going to get paid. Incentives, man.
And you have these discussions in the company with the senior people, and they all know it, and they don't think there's anything they can do about it. In other words, it's
like, wow, we can't.
It's an architectural problem.
Box no, can't get out of.
And then I go to New York, and I don't want to mention names again, but there are only so many really big agencies in the world, right? I mean, they control the world of advertising, right? Right. And especially because they know, and the competence of despite what we think, right, as viewing their ads, the competency of these people is like the super competency of any other field. They're unfucking believable. Right. So I'm talking to one of the CEOs of one of the, big 3 ad agencies in the world. And he's like, well, you're in there and you're trying to fix it. And I've been in there, I've fixed it. He's been in there and he's trying to fix it. He's been in there. There's nothing we can do because no matter what we do, they don't listen to us and they just do the wrong thing again. Right. I mean, and that was like, of course, this is all during Ballmer, right? He was a real problem. He was the real problem. He's the one who got them in trouble. Because unlike Gates, he really didn't understand the technology. And these are people that I have to work with, that I care about. I'm nobody, right? If a company does $50 million a year with Microsoft, barely registers. It registers enough to get you the meeting if you want one, right? Because you have some specific, like for us, we're the biggest privately held Microsoft-based technology company. So it wasn't the 50 million we did with them. It's the 100 million we did outside of them, and especially in their core competencies, right?
Right.
So we used to joke that you guys bought Razorfish and they don't use your products, and we're the same and we use your products, and we just think that's really funny. And of course, Ballmer falls back in his chair, like this. He's sitting next to me. Right? Falls back in his chair. So, so anyway, where was I going with this?
Identities card.
Oh yeah. So the problem is you're trying to teach these people who've been raised on television as the Holy Grail. And I'm trying to say, yeah, but what you were trying to do is get one ad that hit. When that's not going to happen. It's not going to work
The
anymore.
silver bullet process.
It's not, and that's what they win awards for, right? That, that's what the Clios give you, right? That's how you get big money, because you, right, and get local awareness. And I'm like, and of course I swear to God, more than half of the audience would always say something like, "You're out of your fucking mind," except like the people from Google, Facebook. Like, oh yeah, of course, because they've got data, right?
Okay.
They've got data, and they can see where it's going. And of course, that's my thing, right? And my company was the complex value proposition. So to me, I already understood the problem of complex value propositions is I've got to talk to fucking you.
Yes.
If that means we got to make 5 different messages to talk to you and you and you and you about that topic, then we've got to create 5 different messages.
That's right.
So identities matter because they're systems of measurement, and they are the systems of measurement we use to make decisions in what's called a kaleidic universe, meaning that any illusion of predictability of the future is just that.
Right.
But we need confidence to act in that kaleidic future. Otherwise, we'd have nervous breakdowns. Like
you would be unable to act.
You'd be unable to act. You have to believe that your actions are going to resort. And so in that sense, human groups work a lot more like schools of fish or flocks of birds or herds of cattle than we would like to admit. The difference is we defect more easily than herds of cattle, schools of fish, or flocks of birds into new opportunities. But really, that's the difference. So, and that's because these identities, the ideas. And so there is a value in the commercial production of identities, right? Novel identities, because they're like novel, it's like a novel philosophy. A novel philosophy just means a system of decidability given some context. Well, what's an identity? It's a philosophy embodied in an empathically and sympathetically accessible form, instead of an irrational logical, form. Whereas what I do is the scientific form, right? What we do. That's what we do. We do the scientific form. And why? Because it's universally commensurable across all.
That was nice. That was nice, man. I like that. That was
the difference, though, is that all we can tell you is what not to do. You still need the philosophical identity, right? The philosophical reasoning and the identity structures in order to assist people in making decisions about the world they live in.
They need a positiva.
They need a positiva. It's no good. I mean, the negativa is only so good in prohibiting the production of via positivas that are bad. Woke, right? I mean, under our natural law, the woke is illegal.
Man, that was a good just a.
And in the end, I mean, it's like, how are we going to deliver this message? You've beat me up about this a couple of times tonight.
Oh, here we go.
No.
I put my duck suit on. I'm good.
No. I'm complimenting you. You just don't know it yet.
Not yet. Thank you ahead of time.
And it's that, it's like I could start out with, there's an axis to the universe of computation. That axis among humans is masculine, female, and the compromises in between. This is the primary axis of all adaptive evolution. When it comes to societies, you end up with the trifunctional system. The civilizations specialize in these different portions of it because it was for these particular advantages. And in producing those things, we all developed something we call law, and which is command law, religious law, traditional law, or empirical law. And that's the different civilizations chose these things because that's what they were able to do for linguistic, conceptual, moral, traditional reasons. And what happened is from the time immemorial to the present to 1900, almost nothing changed, right? By the time, but everything changed after the Industrial Revolution. And between the Industrial Revolution and 1900, we adapted to that. But after 1900, we adapted to our new condition, which is this vast increase of $3 trillion to $120 trillion in a century. But what happens is that we were no longer constrained by the agrarian era to maintain the compromises between the two the true sexual evolutionary strategies and the group group evolutionary strategies. We were never we thought we were unconstrained from them, and so we let them go. So what do we see in the most egalitarian societies? Women become more female in interests, and men become more male. They don't converge because the oppression was equal. Right. So, but what happened is we, during this whole time period of 50,000 years until 1900, we'd specialized in the incremental suppression of irreciprocity under the agrarian tradition. Well, because of the realities of distributing the work of productivity and childbearing, the suppression of the only people entering the marketplace and the polity were largely men, and so we specialized for 50,000 years, or especially the last 10,000 or 7,000, in the incremental suppression of male antisocial, anti-political, anti-civilizational behavior. But what happened is, just as we've loosened, we've let women into the economy and franchise in order to equally compete with men. What's happened is women have just as they've expressed their female preference in the Scandinavian companies because of the most equality, women are expressing their preferences in the broader modern democratic polities. And for that reason, what's happening is we haven't suppressed female antisocial, anti-political, anti-civilizational behavior to the same degree we have suppressed male antisocial, anti-political, anti-civilizational behavior. And that's just a matter of reforming our laws to suppress female antisocial, anti-political, anti-civilizational behavior, so that it's possible for us to continue to vary and specialize in our interests without imposing our will on the opposite through various kinds of criminal activity, whether it be antisocial, anti-political, or anti-civilizational. So in the end, this is just a simple contextual problem of evolutionary opportunity we've created for individual personal expression. The problem is that men know men know what is bad because they suppress it in other men. But women don't suppress other women. Women encourage other women. And so what's happened is we let Pandora out of the box without equally suppressing the female behavior. Does that mean only females do it? No, it means that there's a division of computational interest between the sexes, and it turns out to be left, center, and right. And this division of labor turns out to be moral instinct. It's not reason. I'm this way because I'm right. No, it's because you have genetic fucking bias in you that tells you to be that much more masculine or feminine, and your cognitive bias, right? In other words, follow your group strategy. So coming to that end, it's just necessary to increase the scope of our laws to equally suppress what we consider that what originates in the female method of antisocial, anti-political, anti-civilizational crime, right? We just suppress that crime, and whether it be social and moral, political, or economic, or civilizational culture, institutions of cultural production, we cease that, and by ending this false promise that women were oppressed rather than just as domesticated as men, because they're just as bad, and in truth they're worse, because men can kill each other and the civilization can go on, but if women kill the civilization can't go on. And the problem is, as we've seen by Christianity, Judaism, Islam, the female method is extremely good at destroying civilizations. It's destroyed 6 civilizations of the ancient world. It's in the process. It almost succeeded with Christianity in destroying European civilization. And the PC woke Marxist, neo-Marxist, postmodern attempt is to destroy civilization is again through the female method, because it's like sterilizing the population genetically is the same thing as sterilizing its means of reproduction informationally. And so they're basically committing genocide against not only our people, but our civilization. And they've done it successfully so many other places that we can't say it can't be done here. It can be, it is being done here. So when I say, when you want to, my problem is that that's the whole story.
It is the whole story. I
want
to tip my hat to you if I don't have a hat, but I don't.
Yeah, but
you summarized that.
Is that story inoffensive enough for you?
That was quite inoffensive.
Well, that's the hard part. You had to get me so I could tell that story that inoffensively, because it was really hard. It took me freaking 9 months to be able to tell that story without losing my temper.
You did a great job. That was an epically good piece of work. I made the time notes.
Well, that's what's wrong. And we finish it off with the Constitution was a constitution of natural law, right? Which was equality, reciprocity, sovereignty, whatever. The problem is it didn't, they put freedom of speech in there without why and what the limit was. They put freedom of religion in there without why and what the limit was, right? It didn't explain, it doesn't explain why the House, the church, the House, the Senate, the presidency, did I say the church already?
Yes.
Yeah. And why those things were put into place. And they don't, I missed one. The one I missed was the one that elects the president, the
college, the electoral college.
Yeah, the electoral college. It's because they're actually stopping the whole point is to prohibit demographic democracy and instead force state pluralism. In other words, you had to get the majority of the countries to approve. Just like Europe has to get the, pretty much universal approval. Our thing was you had to get the majority of the states to approve. We don't live in a democracy. The whole freaking country was engineered to prevent democracy.
There you have it.
Because democracy is go through history. It's a bad thing. It always ends up in a race to the bottom.
It's all very good.
So the Constitution has 8 holes that I've said, 8 holes, right? 6 that were original and 2 that followed or something like that, or 3 that followed. And, I plug those holes. I say how to fix the law and the economy, right? And the polity, so that men and women don't have to, our guys' belief is that you have to take women out of politics. I'm like, women are just animals like us, men, right? They just need to know their fucking limits. Will they like it? No criminal likes their crimes, their justified criminality suppressed. Well, but what is kleptoparasitism? What is female instinct? It's theft, right? It says, I'm due because of my whatever, mere existence, not because of my performance. Well, when women are carrying the burden of children for a tribe, that makes a lot, or a clan, that makes perfect fucking sense, right? Everybody's got to get their share, right? Because we got to all take care of each other because we're living on the margins. But that doesn't mean you don't have rights, that you have rights without duties, obligations, and alienations, right? And total prohibitions, right? It doesn't mean there aren't any taboos. And unfortunately for women, the problem with their taboo is it means they got to watch their mouths for almost every syllable that comes out of them, because the women's nature is to lie and deny by substituting what they desire for truth. They can't tell the difference between desirable and true.
That's right. So it's an error.
It's just, it's an animal instinct. That's why I'm like, don't tell me you're equal to men until you solve that goddamn problem. We can listen to you and understand you're being empathic, even if we don't originally see it. But women can't look at the polity and rationally do the same. It's the same thing for liberals. They specialize in harm care and proportionality, right? But they fucking ignore liberty, hierarchy, the hierarchy, loyalty, and purity discussed. They freaking ignore that stuff out the window. So we don't, conservative means we think about everything. Being a woman things, I think about my brood and myself, and that's it. Well, and then they say that they're being virtuous. You're not. You're just trying to get shit for free.
Well, they outsource the working parts. The parts that they don't want to pay attention to, they outsource.
Well, men do the same thing. Men completely discount the cognitive emotional burden of motherhood, right? Now, guys in my generation didn't. I was raised to be, you respect your fucking mother. You have an idea what it takes to be your mother? Let me walk you through what she does for you. You get enough of those goddamn speeches, you're like, oh, Holy Mother Mary,
Right,
you know, is, so you can train your children to be respectful of their mothers, and to understand that the huge cost mothers pay, and that of course women are going to go out there and want to earn money and get all and attention whore, right, and experience whore, right? They're going to, and socially whore. They're going to do all that stuff because it's hyper consumptive. Is that more fun than working at raising children? Yeah, well, it is. I can't deny it. However, children got to get raised. If you ask me, wouldn't it be more fun to go raiding and pillaging and murdering and conquering? Absolutely. I mean, if I could get the only thing is, business is a legal way of doing that. It's the pro-social way of doing that. But I mean, if I had the opportunity
sure.
to be Genghis Khan, I'd use it in a moment. I wouldn't even think about it, right? And so it's the guys like me I think about, right? I mean, the world isn't full of you chicks, right? The guys that are able, they think like me. It's just too much to work to conquer you, right? It's easier to just do business and get rich, right, and have everything, right? And so, this is the problem, is that we can see the women and they can't see us. We can see the liberals and they can't see us. So
they project their weaknesses upon the people who don't agree with them.
Right. And so this is all female, right? It's all projection, externalization, cost distribution, right? The whole purpose of the female is to maximize consumption and externalize costs. And it makes sense if you got 8 kids, because you're trying to obtain resources. But the minute, instead of it goes into you and you're fucking virtue signaling, and worse, you start virtue signaling to the political and starving men, right? Or decreasing reproduction, then it's crime. It's just theft. We don't think of it as theft because we've never had to think about it as theft before. But operationally, it's not an opinion. It's not an opinion about whether it's theft. It is, in fact, theft, right? So, I mean, that's what it is. You don't get to impose costs upon the commons so that you can hyper consume and burn down the commons, and instead of producing a generation equally capable of producing the same quality of life for the next generation. So anyway, so I think that's the hard conversation to have. Can we have it as one that doesn't generate too much flame, hatred? I don't know. That's the best way that's the best story I can tell without losing my temper.
That was pretty good. Strong work. Now you're ready to work on neurology?
I don't think we're ready for neurology yet.
Oh, well, I thought that's what you wanted to do today.
We have to finish. We did common interests yesterday.
Oh, there you go.
And I was going to
make you the host. Yeah,
so the natural.
Go ahead.
Try to close my. So we're going through it. Start in the middle with reciprocity, which is essentially morality, which I'll cover in a moment. And then we started out with acquisition and worked our way through cooperation, etc. And then we said, well, when we're cooperating, what are we trying to acquire? Trying to acquire, and we went over capital in toto, right, which is demonstrated interest. Those things we have in the categories that we acquire. So that's what drives incentives. And it's also important because what we said is you have to measure all of these things and you have to protect all these assets.
Right.
We are really good at protecting in our country, in our civilization. We're very good at protecting several property. We're very good at protecting sovereignty, bodily action property. We're okay at protecting physical common property, but we're not very good at protecting informal institutional property, norms, traditions, values, etc. We've gotten weak at that because the church was traditionally the guardian of it. Because the church held that position and the state held property. That's why we were able to survive Christianity, is a state maintained a jurisdiction over property, and the church maintained jurisdiction over morality. morality is what produces the institutions of cultural production, right? So the church ended up managing that institution of cultural production, at least on the educational side.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm distracted because I have a neighbor building something somewhere. I sometimes I fantasize she's beating her son with her adult son on the head with a rolling pin, because that's what it sounds like to me. But I think it's probably just she's preparing some meal. Anyway, so we went over that. But the thing is, how do we institutionalize those demonstrated interests? In other words, how do we develop the means of ensuring them? Because we can demonstrate an interest, but that only makes sense if you're trying to protect that interest. And you have to organize to protect that interest.
I would say that it's in order for the interest to be persistent, it must be ensured.
Yes, in order to preserve the interest, it must be ensured, because and an important thing is, which the libertarians always forget their limits, is it must be ensured sufficiently to actually produce insurance, right? This is why we have armies, right?
That's a weird premise. I like it. Yes, it must be insured. And
In
it's
other words,
like,
you don't get to determine arbitrarily what insurance means.
and insurance is a social institution then necessary for cultural production.
Correct. Ergo, property is a natural want. It must be made a right. Right? It must be constructed like any other commons to produce a right. I'm trying to find a.
Okay.
Okay. And it's important, like this is a great example of the use of disambiguation and operationalization to prevent deceit by means of conflation.
Okay.
Right? Disambiguation and operationalization to prevent deceit by conflation.
Okay.
So this is a great example of how important it is to disambiguate something into first principles, so that no one is saying, well, property is a right. No, property is a useful norm. It's a useful tradition, and it's a useful political institution, right? But it has a means of enforcement at the interpersonal, right? At the social, at the political, and at the military level, right? So let's go over. I'm not sharing it, am I?
No.
Can you see this?
Yes,
One bears costs.
that's correct.
Let's move you down to here again and go up to, oh, I think I changed this. So it's to the right of TV today.
Yes.
All right. So we have to prevent defense.
That's right.
Right? You have to defend those demonstrated interests. This is operationalism. You notice how libertarians always talk ideals and liberals always talk in fictions.
Okay.
And unfortunately, conservatives talk in traditions. The traditions are empirical, so they tend to be right, but they
Okay.
don't know how to convert it from traditional to empirical language. And as I said, the reason I got started on this project was to give conservatives an adult language rather than sounding like morons, an adult language for discussing their traditions, which origins were not arbitrary, but the results of empirical trial and error. So when you get a demonstrated interest, right? When you demonstrated interest, you've paid the cost, right, of existing and persisting that interest, right? So we usually call this first as settlement or first use. Homesteading. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. Homesteading or settlement, homesteading, or originating. First use or originating. Now, that's the first way. So you have this. So first of all, you bear the cost of existing with your natural interests, right? You bear the cost of acting, which is a demonstrated action, and you do it by settlement, homesteading, first use, or originating. You bear the cost of acquiring that stuff, which is demonstrated cost, right? You've borne that cost. You've demonstrated interest by bearing that cost, making a demonstrated interest. And then you have a problem is that how do you insure it? Well, you can possess it. It's a fact, right? You can possess it, in fact, and you can self-defend it.
Right. Self-insurance.
Right? You can agree with others in reciprocity. Family, clan, and community insurance, right? But then if you say you want to write, right? Right? I hate when I say right, and I try to stop myself, but it's just so subconscious, it's hard. So possession is a fact, property is an agreement, and property rights require an institutional enforcement. In other words, a right is something you go to a court or enforcer to demand be satisfied. In other words, it's a means of resolution of disputes.
Right.
Right. So of these rights, you can have. I'm
sorry.
Go ahead, please do.
It's the property rights each of these is an expansion of cooperative limits. From the individual to the people I know to everybody in our civilization.
Yeah, I tend to put. I forgot one I usually put in here. I'll just add it for now, but it's just consent.
Sure.
This is usually in family. Right? We just agree that some normative terms.
Right.
Right. So like, it's really common with people to be very flexible. I used lawnmower yesterday, but
my wife likes to complain about her sister borrowing her sweater. And it's like this.
Exactly.
It's like that was not without consent property rights violation that she's carping about 40 years later.
But you don't enforce it. Like when my sister Ellen borrowed my car and totaled it.
Borrowed it to extinction, did she?
Fucking ass clown. Anyway, my sister, I love her, but if she can do something stupid, she will.
Oh my.
Should have married her off back in the day. She would have been fine. Anyway, so you have possession in fact, you have consensual possession.
Right. That's kind of like a corporate, you know, a corporate function.
Well, I mean, you're just walking through the population increase.
No, it should be consensual, no? Oh, gee. That was weird.
Consensual.
Thank you.
Consensual. Why I do that is that I too much programming.
It's okay. Doesn't matter how you get the answer correct.
Well, it's just do a little, pay attention. All right. Proper. So what this is a scope.
It's a scale issue.
So we said before, where is it? Right? We're trying to preserve our condition, avoid cost, acquired gains. We have three means of cooperation. We've discussed when those means are rational, right? We've done it with the 5 laws. We've stated the limits. We've gone through what those demonstrated interests are. And we have explained the defense of those demonstrated interests by a sequence of the development of social institutions. So therefore, right, you have, so this is the difference between a natural right necessary, a desired right, right? A consensual, normative, and institutional, right? These are really human rights. The laws of cooperation. You can have a desire for it. You can have a produced. And you can have a more natural. I want to say this is natural, right? And then you can have an artificial, right?
Yeah, rent.
Institutional privilege. Let's just say it's good. Institutional right. Bad. So we have this terrible. What's that?
That's really good. I don't understand a produced natural right, however. Is it like a product of cooperative output.
Right. I mean, you have to produce it, right? I mean, it's got to become existential, right? You can want this, but it's not existential. It may be necessary for people to get along, but it doesn't exist, right? You can have a desire for it, but now you have existence. You have want.
Okay.
So the difference is what I'm trying to get away from is what you would call ideals yesterday, which is that, but I have a human right. No, you may need one.
Right.
You may want one, but you've got to make one. You know? Right. And even so, there's a difference between a natural right, which is a contract, which is which is an exception, right? So an institutional privilege, an institutional rent, an institutional crime, right? So, for example, there are some necessary rights you have to have, which are generally procedural. So the right to an attorney, right? Right, those are procedural, right? These are, sovereignty, reciprocity, etc. Right? You can have an institutional right, which is procedural right, which is to defend these things, the process by which to defend these things. You can have an institutional privilege, a good like Social Security,
Right.
or healthcare, or education, right? You can have, forgot one. Is a defense.
Okay.
Right. So right now you have the goods. You can have right, and you can have an institutional privilege. Right, so due process, defense, commons, goods, bads, and crimes, right? You can also have an institutional. Right, I mean.
Yes.
So the problem is you have to put these into what are actually rights. Up under here, those are privilege. These are privileges. So you need rights to cooperate, right? You need to get them. You need to be insured. Right? You need it insured. But they can be naturally necessary and you can want them or not. Criminals don't always want them. Existential rights, you can you can produce those consensual normative institutional rights to sovereignty, reciprocity, truth, duty, etc. You can, in order to make that happen, you need a institutional right of due process, which is policies, procedures, and whatever. You need some means of ensuring or defending those rights, which is police, fire, whatever, treasury. And you have an institutional right to the production of commons, because that's the fucking purpose of government, is to produce these commons, right? I mean, those are existential rights. But you can also bring into good institutional privileges, both good and bad. Sure, you can bring a privilege, but that's not a right. One of the things we do is we don't distinguish between rights and privileges.
No, that's I think it's intentional. So this looks like a series of insurable rights.
Correct.
Properties. A right is a property, no?
A right is an asset, correct. You've paid for it.
As insured by the social order.
Right.
Okay.
Now, we could get into rights theory quite a bit here, and I want to save that for the legal section, but the point being that every right includes an obligation.
It's because a trade has been made with the society.
Right? So whenever you've got three components. You've got the right, which is right is a contract.
Right.
Right plus obligation plus inalienation means that
Yeah.
A right means that you have you can demand obligations from others.
Yes.
An obligation is what you're due to others in exchange, and an alienation means that you can't escape those obligations.
There's a
Nor can you
trifunctionalism
deprive
here.
people of them.
There's a trifunctionalism here that I want to hammer out a little bit. So there's the right, the obligation, which is a duty.
This is what you mean.
There's a obligation, which is the duty, and the inalienation, which is unavoidable nature of the, or inextricable linkage between the two, which is the decidability about the factuality of the right.
Say that again, because I think you had something there.
The inalienation is this decidability, whether or not it can be, that it is in fact there has to be decidability,
Right.
which is the inalienable part of it.
Right.
And then,
Well, it's what holds it as a contract, right?
right. But it has to fit into the trifunctional system, right?
Yeah, this is it, right? Obligation, right? Gain, right? Consumption, production, right? Inalienation, right? We need rights. We may want them or not, right? But they must be constructed by trade.
Mere possession must be constructed by trade and defended with real costs, at real costs, right?
Yeah. This way.
And I would also, let's say they must be
It must be,
It must be decidable function. There must be decidability in there, which is
well, it's always
that's the
decidable by
nature of it,
reciprocity.
right?
Yeah, decidability. Like, you can't have a contract. It's not a contract if it's not reciprocal. And that's a foundation of the law, right? In other words, I can't force you into, if I force you into doing something against your will, it's not a contract.
Right?
Right?
Call it a contract if you want. You can even make me agree that it's a contract. It's like, I don't have to like it either, right?
Uh-huh.
Like that.
Right. And so this is, again, what are we doing? We're doing disambiguation by serialization, by operationalism, right, into a system of measurement by which we prevent deception by conflation, inflation, etc. And so this is why I'm so hung up on teaching people these series, and you are rightfully getting me to capture them,
Good work.
is so that people can't be lied to about what a right is, and people can't claim something's a right they haven't said what's your obligation and alienation for it. Because technically speaking, any right it has to be either, yes, has to be reciprocal, right? But it also has to be negativa. That's a positive rights don't exist, only privileges. Does that make sense?
Yes. It's amazing that they didn't flag that.
I think it's given up because it's so long. See over here, you see this corner?
Okay.
I guess just saying.
Oh, it's thinking about it. I see. I see.
I don't know where that goes right there. I just like the fact that in practice, the most dishonest loses. that's you spend a lot of time in courtrooms. It's not the person who's right that wins. It's the person who's most dishonest loses. That seems to be what happens.
My theory on courts, it goes, it's said in a simple aphorism, which is that the worst thing that you can say coming out of the courtroom is "I was right."
Yes,
It's a bad sign, man.
Well, in matters of conflict, the way our system works, they're trying to prevent you from going to court. Court's costly, it's time consuming. It makes everybody unhappy. It adds a random variable. Well, most of the time, both parties think they're either in the right or they can get away with something. Now, the average person thinks they're right and just. The below average person thinks they has told themselves a lie that they're right and just. And a lot of companies and a lot of law firms specialize in creating narratives that are neither right nor just. So as John Adams said, unfortunately, who tells the best story often wins. So a lot of, like, I've settled a whole bunch of times just because the whole point, what I do is I use time, right? Because time is the best negotiator. And then you just go in with, well, what's fair? And that usually works, and it's cheaper. But if you're all fucking high and mighty, it's just a nightmare. Me, I just stick to my guns. I believe I did the right thing, right? If I did the right thing and I failed, then the court failed, right? That's how I look at it, because I've lost one doing that. I believe I did the right thing. I did the moral thing. I did the best for all parties with the best interest. And if the court disagrees with me, then the court's failed, right? That's how I look at it. And I lost that one because I did do the right thing. But the right thing isn't always what the court decides. Okay, existential rights. Have we got this point across now? We're trying to get across that rights are naturally necessary, right? That the problem is we kind of bring them into being. We can only bring them into being as a commons. The scale that commons might be my family, my clan, my village, my city, my nation, or my state, or my empire, right? I mean, it could be something. We don't know who's going to put that in place, but and that for it to exist, it has to be defended, because a right is essentially an appeal to a decider to defend your interests, because you aren't capable of defending your interests in this case, or you might be prosecuted for aggression if you try to solve it yourself.
Right.
So of this, that all rights are, we need these rights. All rights are contract rights. They follow the trifunctional model of right, obligation, and alienation. Any right has to be reciprocal and inalienable. A right has to be negativa, that someone won't do something, and positive rights won't do something, but a positive right, it doesn't exist, only privileges. So when most people are saying they want rights today, what they want is a privilege. They want an advantage at someone else's expense without reciprocity. In most cases, the left and right differ only on this issue, which is the right wants a behavioral adaptation in return for rewards, and the left wants rewards out of natural existence rather than behavioral adaptation. In other words, the left doesn't want to limit its hyperconsumption, its novelty, and its stimulation, and it wants to avoid all responsibility because it doesn't want to engage in self-monitoring, because that's what impulsive behavior means. It means you've got to self-regulate and develop agency. The right naturally has more agency. It's, of course, more male, which is why it has more agency. So we are naturally wired for responsibility, hierarchy, duty, and purity, right? So we're naturally wired for that stuff. So this is why we like to be left alone, because we don't need others to regulate, and we don't have a problem with self-regulation. So you find the unregulable on the right, or the unregulable on the left, and the irresponsible on the left. You will sometimes see this manifest in differences in young female accountability and young male accountability in jobs and whatever, but this is actually just a temporal condition, because men have to take greater risk in order to leapfrog the women. And in our society, women can choose to be the stable actor and don't have to leapfrog in order to compete. So the only reason for a male to compete is get a woman, because we're basically cheap. All right, have I covered that? Have I covered that well enough? So we have to produce the institution of rights. I think that is a pretty good. So we've gone through. Now, there are two places to go from here. We can go in up from reciprocity. We can continue reciprocity and cooperation up into, right, association classes, family stuff, right? Strategy. Or we could branch back into neurology and cognitive science, and then work our way through language, decidability, etc. I think the population would be happiest if we went through this, but I'm open to taking either path.
I'm either way is fine. I think that it's just a matter of time. It's like, how much time do you want to spend today? Your energy level is high, by the way. I want to compliment you for that. I appreciate you're much more energetic than you have been.
Well, I'm getting better, one day at a time, man.
That's right. That's right. Now, the direction we choose, I'm not partial.
Have we covered this enough already elsewhere?
I think we have, and I was going to ask you that. It's like that's I don't recall having gone over the production of goods, services, and information and commons. I don't know if we did polities together, but I think we covered. Go ahead.
Oh, we just finished. We just finished the necessary of production of rights.
Yes.
Why don't we talk about this next?
That's good.
Right, and I think these are things we've covered, and we can just copy in the. We can just bring over, because they're all in.
Yes.
They're all in here.
Yes.
Right. I mean, we can just cover this. So why don't we do that? Why don't we do that? And then what do we do? Why don't we do this? Then we can quickly review these. And then we say, okay, now we got to do the hard stuff.
Okay.
And we do. This people can handle.
Can what?
I think we can make people understand truth and deceit in the grammars. Right? I think we can do that. You know, when I get up into, you know, physics, neurology, you know, I absolutely love talking about it. I love talking about it, but I hope we don't lose people. You got to keep me.
I don't. The way I figure it is that the people will tune out if they wish to tune out, and in when they see fit, okay. And that's okay. It's no great loss. It's incorporated into the body of the work, and they may become interested in it at another time.
All right, and so we're just trying to capture the series, right?
Right.
And we've got this series here, and then we've got right. So I'm just making sure we've captured the series. We're going to continue to try to that. In other words, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make together the quick reference guide, right?
Right.
That's what we're trying to do. That acquires. Yeah, see, all this stuff is down in here. Cooperation, organizational cooperation. They're organizing biases. Yeah, we've got. I'm going to have fun talking about the universe.
Right.
I'm going to have fun talking about the universe. I'm going to have fun talking about neurology. I find less value in talking about genetics than I used to. But All right, so let's do that. Are we done for the day?
You could do that. That
right.
works. I am very pleased by that little work.
All right, boss.
And I will send you a link shortly.
All right, thank you for your hard work. I love you, man.
All right, we'll talk later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.